Hey everybody, this is Jake Wynn, Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. We are here on the Gaines Mill Battlefield, part of the Richmond National Battlefields Park, to bring you the first in our On Tour series from the 7 Days campaign. In these videos, we are exploring the history, the medical history, of the 7 Days campaign. We're looking at different elements of battlefield medicine during this campaign, visiting the various sites, including here on the Gaines Mill Battlefield, arguably the most famous of the fights during the 7 Days. And we are going to be looking at today, looking at some of the medical aspects of the Battle of Gaines Mill. We're going to be looking at specifically the story of a battlefield first responder, a gentleman named Theophilus Brown. We're going to examine his role here in the Battle of Gaines Mill. We're also going to explore how this battle sits into the medical history of the Civil War, especially in the early part of 1862, looking at the evolution of battlefield medicine. Now, as I mentioned at the opening, this is a part of our On Tour series of videos that are being produced by the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, specifically for our YouTube channel, which we are making an emphasis on putting up videos on a weekly basis on this channel, sometimes more than one video a week, as is in the case of these On Tour series, where we post multiple videos in a single day. You can get more videos like this. You can see more of our content by subscribing to the museum's YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy these videos, hit that thumbs up button as well. That encourages more people to join in, to watch these videos, and to participate in and helping us to tell the story of Civil War medicine. You can also take your support to for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine to the next level. You can become a member of the museum. You get lots of great perks. You also get the knowledge that you are supporting video programs and projects like this one. You can find more information about becoming a member of the museum in the description below. Hope you'll do that. Thank you to all of those incredible members who are watching out there for supporting the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. And for those of you who are maybe tuning in for the first time, consider becoming a member and supporting programs like this. All right, so we are here on the Gaines Mill Battlefield, the second day of the 7 Days campaign in June of 1862. All around us on June 27, 1862, combat was raging and swirling as Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia begin the second day of their offensive against General George McClellan's Army of the Potomac. This is an effort on Lee's part to push the Union Army, the U.S. Army, ahead of him, push them away from Richmond, ultimately drive them back towards the James River. And Lee's goal, as it is throughout the Civil War, is to destroy the United States Army in his front. This is going to be one of the bloodiest days, one of the most vicious periods of combat of the entirety of the American Civil War. The fighting here at Gaines Mill is going to leave a lasting impression upon all of those who participate in this fight, and is going to include one of the largest and most destructive charges of the American Civil War that the Army of Northern Virginia is going to launch against U.S. Army forces in this very vicinity. On that day, more than 15,000 men fell. 15,000 casualties in this single day on June 27, 1862. And in the end, Confederate forces do gain the upper hand, and they're going to continue their offensive and push the Army of the Potomac away, forcing General McClellan into a series of retreats back towards the James River that are ultimately going to end at Harrison's Landing on the James, which we are going to have a video there as part of this On Tour series of videos. Now, here at this site, as with all of the videos in this series, we are going to be examining and pulling in a little bit closer to talk about specific elements of battlefield medicine related to the U.S. Army, to the Confederate Army as well. And here at Gaines Mill, we wanted to take a look specifically at the story of one individual. and that is going to be a hospital steward by the name of Theophilus V. Brown. He serves as a hospital steward in the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, a member of the regular United States Army. He actually is serving before the American Civil War breaks out, one of the 15,000 to 16,000 members of the regular U.S. Army, serves out west in Utah and in campaigns against American Indians on the frontier in the years before the Civil War. But his unit is going to be brought east in 1862 and is going to participate for the first time for Theo Brown. He is going to experience combat himself. So this is going to be the reason that I like to tell the story of Theophilus Brown, and I think his story illustrates a perspective on the Civil War and Civil War combat we don't normally see. When we read about Civil War combat, when we read about what it was like to be in one of these battles, most often we are hearing the perspective of the frontline infantrymen, maybe an artillerist, or their officers. These are officers out there leading their men into combat. We're hearing the story from their frontline perspectives. At the end of, behind the musket, behind the cannons, right there at the front lines in the chaos and carnage of battle. What we don't see as much and as often are the perspectives of the frontline medical personnel that are just behind the front lines and their role is to pick up the pieces of these broken men that are being ripped apart at the front lines of these Civil War engagements. So as those men are falling out of the ranks at the front, cut down by bullets, artillery fire, bayonets, they are falling back, if they are able, to field dressing stations, so field aid stations, or we would call them first aid stations today, that are being manned by medical personnel from these armies. And we don't hear very often from them in the narratives of the American Civil War. And most often, there are not a lot of great perspectives written by these individuals who are experiencing combat at these aid stations. And that is where Theophilus Brown comes in, because in 1900, for the National Tribune newspaper, Theo Brown writes an incredible article which he details his first time in combat as he describes it, a non-combatant combatant, because he is going to the front lines, he is going with his regiment, the 3rd U.S., to combat here at Gaines Mill unarmed, armed only with a medical kit over his back that he is carrying onto the battlefield. And so this perspective, and we're going to follow Theophilus Brown to the front lines in this video program today. And in this story, you're going to hear a fascinating perspective on Civil War combat, of what it was like to be in one of these battlefield aid stations. Now, as I mentioned before, Theophilus Brown is part of the regulars. These are units that are formed part of the standing army that existed before the Civil War. And Brown was their hospital steward. Now that is a kind of a catch-all medical position within a Civil War era regiment. Hospital steward's going to be in charge of administrative duties for the medical personnel of the unit. That also includes typically a surgeon, a full surgeon, and 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 assistant surgeons in those regiments. So Theo Brown and other hospital stewards, their role is to provide administration and administrative work to the surgeons and assistant surgeons in the regiment. So there's a lot of paperwork involved, filing of forms, but there's also the work of being the pharmacy, doing the pharmaceutical work, mixing drugs, mixing concoctions that the surgeons prescribe to the men of the unit. That role is often filled by the hospital steward. And then, in the event of combat operations, hospital stewards oftentimes are going to be detailed to the front, along with one of the regiment's assistant surgeons. And their job is going to be on the battlefield to open regimental aid stations, or dressing stations as they referred to them during the Civil War, and provide first aid, first medical attention to wounded soldiers coming off the front lines. And it is in this role that Theophilus Brown is going to join his comrades in the 3rd U.S. Infantry as they head out to the front lines, not all that far away from where we are right now. And Theo Brown is going to, again, decades later, write about his experiences, leaves behind a beautiful recollection of what it was like to experience the Battle of Gaines Mill. If you want to hear in full Brown's description. We have a video that we filmed in 2020 with our docent and volunteer at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, Rich Parker, who does portray a hospital steward. You can find that video at in the description below if you would like to watch that video, also here on our YouTube channel. So Theophilus Brown describes his first time hearing enemy fire as he wheels out onto the field just behind the 3rd U.S., and this is how he describes it. He says, quote, "Presently, like a peal of thunder from a clear sky, and a piece of iron with its peculiar and highly disagreeable falsetto notes came sailing over us. We did not even catch the report of the gun from which it was fired. What made me look about so frantically for a hole in the ground?" So as Brown is coming out onto the battlefield, never been in combat before, he is as green as they come in terms of battlefield combat. He is looking for cover wherever he can, but soon those shells are going to be coming more frequently, and he is going to become accustomed to operating under intense enemy fire. Brown and his comrade, his superior in this case, is an assistant surgeon named George Sternberg, who is going to, Theophilus Brown is going to join at the battlefield aid station of the 3rd U.S. They are going to find themselves just a few dozen yards behind the 3rd Infantry's line when Confederate fire began falling on them more regularly. Brown helped patch up the regiment's first wounded from shrapnel when the regiment shouted that Confederate infantry was moving towards them. Lee's full-on assault here at Gaines's Mill had begun. Brown recalled his reaction to this. He says, quote, "Fall in," given in a sharp, decisive tone that presages no good, and in a moment the regiment is quick-stepping it past the battery, which is now firing briskly and heading for a narrow valley, which, God help me, now shows a long line of rebel infantry advancing to the attack. While the rising ground behind glistens with objects that my fast-beating heart tells me are hostile cannon, and towards these still we are marching. I look at Dr. Sternberg with a glance he well understands, and which says, remember that we are non-combatants, and that our duty is to the man we left behind. The doctor is pale but resolute, and answers my glance with one that says, follow me, accompanied with an attempt at a smile. So though still dissenting from my superior as to the propriety of going further in that direction, I conclude to make a virtue of necessity, keep cool and trust to luck, as every soldier does. Brown heard an increasing number of zipping noises as he gets closer to the front lines. He keeps hearing these zipping noises going past his head, and he actually believes that maybe it's some kind of strange insect that may be common to this part of Virginia, which he had never visited before. As my colleague John Lustria has told me, he heard from a tour guide once that the bugs here on the Virginia Peninsula, they'll pick you right up. This is what Brown believes he hears are these strange bugs. But then he begins to realize as dust starts to kick up around him, those aren't bugs. Those are enemy bullets. Beginning to strike the ground and sounding right around his head. He knows he has entered the thick of the fight, even though he's a few dozen yards behind the regiment. And this is where Brown's account gets truly fascinating. He describes the establishment and operations of a battlefield dressing station just behind the lines, the first level of care that is going to be set up on a Civil War battlefield. This is where Civil War soldiers are going to receive first aid attention, the first medical care that they'll get on their path towards the field hospital and further on towards the rear. This is what Brown writes, quote, "When within a couple hundred yards of the enemy, the regiment formed in line of battle, and the other regiments formed in line of battle, and the brigade formed on its left and began firing. Dr. Sternberg and I, with our hospital force consisting of 4 hospital attendants, the regimental band, and all the drummers and fifers, took position 100 yards behind the fighting line and planted our red flag, both to direct the wounded and to inform the hostile artillery of our character and mission. One of the hospital attendants carried the field case of surgical instruments, another the hospital knapsack containing anesthetics, styptics, and bandages, and another led the doctor's horse, and the rest carried litters, pails filled with water, wash basins, and canteens. Dr. Sternberg now unlimbered his pocket case of instruments, and I did the same, little as I knew of their use. Indeed, little did I know of medicine and less of surgery. So as the battle is raging, Dr. Sternberg and Hospital Steward Brown are going into action in their medical responsibility, beginning to patch up the wounded that are coming in dribs into their aid station, but soon coming in scores as the fighting rages to life. A red flag, as you may have noticed in that account, a red flag planted at their aid station. This is as a medical symbol to state to the enemy and also to friends that this is an aid station. This is where wounded are being cared for. This does little service in all actuality because on the battlefields of the Civil War, smoke is so prevalent that it is very much nearly impossible to see that far beyond the enemy line because of all of the battle smoke. But nevertheless, they put up that flag, which will also mark Civil War hospitals, Civil War ambulances as well, marking in the age before the American Red Cross where medical work and non-combatants were participating. So as wounded soldiers are beginning to come into their aid station, Brown describes some of the things that they would say. He would ask questions like, "My poor fellow, where are you hurt?" The soldier would respond, "Right here in my arm." And then Brown goes on to write, quote, "Finding no wound of exit, I would feel for the bullet. Compass the surrounding parts with the thumb and forefinger of my left hand. Cut down to the bullet. Insert the little finger of my right hand under it. Yank it out. Put a bandage around the arm. And be ready for the next man." Now, in that account, I think it is vital to say that in the Civil War, there is a lack of understanding of germ theory, a lack of understanding of how important cleanliness was. And so these hands that he is using, the instruments he is using, and that of Dr. Sternberg, the assistant surgeon, are not washed. Unclean hands, unclean instruments. Infection is virtually universal among Civil War wounded soldiers. Brown documented the stragglers he also saw streaming past the aid station. He noted incidents at the dressing station as well, including hearing Dr. Sternberg pronounce an officer's wounds mortal and hearing his last words. Brown and Sternberg worked for about an hour on the evening of June 27th at this makeshift position, patching up soldiers, staunching their bleeding, giving painkillers as well, and sending patients off to a field hospital about a half-mile away in an orchard. Brown and Sternberg and the rest of the 3rd U.S. fell back when the battle tide turned against them. Of course, as I mentioned at the opening of this video, this is a Confederate victory. The U.S. Army is going to be chased off the field in quite speedily. Darkness is really all that saves this part of the U.S. Army from destruction on this day. And years later, as Brown is coming back to these memories of Gaines' Mill, he's thinking about how little service he actually did on this battlefield. Despite all of the work that he described, the chaotic scenes he witnessed, the bandages he puts on, he in the end believed that he wasn't able to do all that much good on this battlefield. This is what he wrote. It says, quote, "When late that night I wrapped myself in my one blanket under an oak tree to seek rest and oblivion of the day's sad experiences, I said to myself that we, the hospital party, could have probably done much more good had we stayed farther away from the battlefield. Our presence on the battlefield was, in my opinion, calculated simply to swell the list of dead and wounded and of pensioners. I also resolved that any future war I should participate in should not find me in the role of a non-combatant combatant." Now, Brown does go on to serve later on in the Civil War. Dr. Sternberg continues on serving with the 3rd U.S. Infantry. He actually becomes seriously ill at Harrison's Landing, comes sick with typhoid fever, Dr. Sternberg does, and is almost on the verge of death before he is evacuated away, like so many other wounded soldiers from this campaign, to a hospital in Washington. Now, Brown's account did appear in a 1900 edition of the National Tribune newspaper operated by the Grand Army of the Republic. It remains one of the best battlefield medical accounts that I have ever encountered. You will find a description, a link to the full account on our website, civilwarmed.org, as well in the description of this video. As for the wounded that Brown and Sternberg are treating here on the Gaines' Mill battlefield and sending back to the rear, not a lot good comes to them. Many of them are going to be evacuated to a place called Savage's Station. They're going to be evacuated away, and at that point, the evacuation system for the U.S. Army begins to break down. This is all documented in one of the most remarkable photographs you'll ever see from the American Civil War. This was photographed by James Gibson in the days after the fight here at Gaines's Mill, and it captures hundreds of wounded soldiers awaiting medical attention. It shows chaos and the serious nature of the wounds. You see soldiers sitting, waiting medical attention, some clearly in agony as medical attendants are trying to give attention to some of these wounded. What is remarkable as well about that photograph is it captures a moment in time. A moment in time between when those soldiers were wounded here at the Battle of Gaines's Mill and when they are captured almost entirely by the Army of Northern Virginia when they overrun that field hospital. For lack of organized ambulances, for lack of organized evacuation systems, most of those wounded from the Battle of Gaines's Mill are lost to the Confederate Army and are going to be taken to prisons and hospitals in Richmond in the wake of the battle. A testament to the disorganization and chaos of the 7 Days campaign, but also of the Army of the Potomac's medical department up to this point of the American Civil War. Now, the Confederate wounded, just to touch on them, are going to be speedily evacuated back to Richmond's numerous hospitals, and in this campaign, as we'll discuss a little later in these videos, the Confederate Army, the Army of Northern Virginia, is going to fight with Richmond, their capital, at their back, with dozens of medical facilities that have been established by this point in the war, and that is going to mean that they're going to have speedy evacuation, relatively, compared to the Union Army, speedy evacuation to their hospitals. And that is going to mean that more of those Confederate soldiers, their lives are going to be have a higher likelihood, especially from this early stage of the 7 days, of being saved in those battlefield hospitals. Time is key in the medical fight amongst the U.S. Army and the Confederate Army during the Civil War. Time is of the essence in saving the lives of these soldiers. As for the U.S. Army soldiers that are lucky enough to be evacuated away, they're going to head for Harrison's Landing. We're going to talk about Harrison's Landing a little bit later in these videos as well. And they're going to be then evacuated on to Washington, D.C. and other hospitals as well. So all told, this battle, one of the bloodiest battle of the 7 days, is also going to be one that, as I mentioned from the offing, for Theo Brown and countless other soldiers who participate here, it is going to be a battle that lives long in their memory for the horrors that they witnessed here. But it is also going to be a battle that will play a role in some of the major medical evolutions that are going to come out of the 7 days battle, as the chaos and carnage and disorganization in Union and Confederate armies is going to be grappled with as a result of this campaign, and key changes are going to be made to ensure that soldiers are given prompt and adequate medical attention on the battlefield and in the hours, days, and weeks that follow their wounding on battlefields such as this. I hope you enjoyed today's video, today's program. As mentioned, this is part of our On Tour series, so this is part of a playlist. You can find that playlist, will pop up somewhere around my head at the conclusion of this video. You can click onto the next video, which will be at Malvern Hill. You can support us by subscribing to our channel. You'll see more videos like this. You can like the video. That will show people that you enjoyed it. We'll also encourage others to participate. And if you'd like to take your support for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine to the next level, you can become a member. You get lots of great perks. You'll also support sharing Civil War medical history like this. You can find a link to where you can become a member in the description below. My name is Jake Wynn. I am Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. We'll see you next time.